Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's making them watch as you succeed despite their best efforts to break you. The words tasted sweet as honey on my tongue as I watched my father's face turn ashen. His empire, built on lies and favoritism, was crumbling before his eyes. And I, the daughter he had spent 27 years dismissing, was now holding all the cards. My earliest memory is of my 6th birthday. While other girls got parties and presents, I got a lesson in what it meant to be the other Mitchell child. "We can't have a party this weekend, darling," my mother had said, perfectly manicured nails adjusting her pearl necklace. "Your brother's debate tournament is more important. You understand, don't you?" I didn't understand. Just like I didn't understand why Alexander's room was filled with trophies for participation while my straight A's earned nothing but a distracted, "That's nice, dear." Or why he got private tennis lessons while I was told to focus on my studies. Or why my father attended every one of Alexander's Little League games but was too busy for my science fair championships. But let me take you back to where this story really begins. Not to the day they cut me from their will, that was just the final insult. No, this story starts 10 years ago, at my grandmother Margaret's funeral, the day I finally understood the true depth of my family's dysfunction. The autumn air was crisp as I stood in the cemetery, watching my father Victor deliver his eulogy with the same clinical precision he used in board meetings. My mother Diana sat perfectly composed, her Hermes scarf arranged just so, more concerned with appearances than actual grief. And my brother Alexander, the golden child, stood stoically by their side, already every inch the investment banker he would become. I was 17 then, but the weight of a lifetime's worth of second-best status sat heavy on my shoulders. Just that morning, I'd overheard my mother on the phone. "Yes, Alexander's doing brilliantly at Morgan Stanley." "Lauren? Oh, she's still at Harvard. Computer science, if you can believe it." No, we're not thrilled either. Grandmother Margaret had been different. She was the only one who saw through the facade of our perfect family. She'd been there when I was 8 and won the state mathematics Olympiad, only to have my parents skip the ceremony because Alexander had a cold. She'd been there when I was 12 and built my first computer, while my parents fawned over Alexander's C+ in economics. The night before she died, she'd called me to her bedside, away from the hovering presence of my parents. Her words still echo in my mind. "Lauren, my bright girl, don't let them dim your light. They favor your brother not because he shines brighter, but because his light is the kind they understand. Your brilliance scares them." That same night, I'd overheard my parents in the hallway. "She's filling Lauren's head with nonsense," my father had hissed. "All this talk about following your dreams, look what good that did Margaret. A brilliant surgeon who never married, never had the right connections." After the funeral, we gathered in her study for the reading of the will. That's when everything changed. While my parents and Alexander received their expected shares, substantial trust funds and property holdings, I was given something different, a small jewelry box and a letter. The letter changed everything. "My dearest Lauren. If you're reading this, I'm no longer here to protect you from the cage they're building around you. Your father, my son, lost his way long ago, choosing wealth over wisdom, control over compassion. I've watched them systematically diminish you while elevating your brother. I saw your tears when they missed your 13th birthday for Alexander's golf tournament. I heard your muffled sobs the night they praised him for his C while ignoring your perfect SAT scores. But I've also seen your strength. The way you kept going, kept achieving, kept growing despite their best efforts to stunt you. That inner fire they've tried so hard to extinguish? It's your greatest gift." In the jewelry box, you'll find my grandmother's sapphire ring. She sold everything else to put herself through medical school in 1920, when people said women couldn't be doctors. She too had parents who tried to clip her wings, who told her to be practical, and I know her place. Keep this ring as a reminder that our family's true legacy isn't in bank accounts or social status, it's in the courage to forge our own path. Every time they make you feel small, remember, you come from a line of women who refuse to be diminished. Don't let them break you, Lauren. You're stronger than they know, and that's what terrifies them. All my love. Grandmother Margaret. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, the sapphire ring glinting in the dim light. 20 years of memories flooded back, The Christmas when Alexander got a car while I got a lecture about being practical. The summer when they sent him to Europe but told me to focus on building your resume. The countless family photos where I was positioned just slightly off-center, a visual reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. The next morning, my father called a family meeting, his euphemism for issuing directives. The study was his favorite stage for these performances, with its dark wood panels and imposing portraits of Mitchell patriarchs looking down on us. "Lauren," he began, his voice carrying that familiar tone of controlled disappointment, "your grandmother's unusual decisions don't change our expectations. The Mitchell name comes with responsibilities. Your brother understands this, he's already secured his position at Morgan Stanley." I looked at Alexander, saw the subtle smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. At 22, fresh out of college and already at Morgan Stanley, he was everything my parents wanted, engaged to the daughter of another prominent family, his path carved in marble. Never mind that his grades had been average, that he'd needed our father's connections to secure his position. "I've already discussed this with the dean," my father continued, "you'll switch your major to pre-law next semester. This computer science nonsense ends now. We've indulged your eccentricities long enough." The words indulged and eccentricities hit like physical blows. My perfect grades, my innovations, my achievements, all dismissed as mere quirks to be tolerated. "But I'm top of my class," I protested. "My professors say I have real potential." "Your brother was making actual money at your age," my mother interrupted. "All you have are theoretical achievements. Really, Lauren, it's time to grow up. We can't keep supporting both your brother's career and your hobbies." The sapphire ring felt heavy in my pocket as I stood up, my voice shaking but clear, "No." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's perfectly manicured hands froze mid-gesture. Alexander's smirk vanished. And my father, his face turned that particular shade of red that appeared only when his control was truly threatened. "Excuse me," he asked, each syllable precisely enunciated. I said no, I repeated, stronger this time. Grandmother believed in me, in my choices. "I'm staying in computer science." What followed was the first of many explosive confrontations that would define our relationship over the next decade. My father threatened to cut off my tuition. My mother cried about family duty and reputation. Alexander watched it all with a mix of fascination and relief that the spotlight of disappointment had shifted away from him. But they underestimated both my resolve and my preparation. What they didn't know was that I'd already secured a full academic scholarship. Grandmother had helped me apply before she died, knowing this day would come. "Fine," my father finally said, his voice ice cold. "But remember this moment, Lauren. Remember that you chose this path." And now, a decade later, standing in my father's office with the proof of his corruption in my hands, I understood what Grandmother Margaret had meant about being strong. The sapphire ring glinted on my finger as I watched my father reach for his phone, no doubt to call his army of lawyers. "Don't bother calling them, Dad," I said calmly. "The board already knows. Everyone knows. The only question is, are you ready to see your perfect world fall apart? The world where Alexander could do no wrong and I could do no right?" His hand froze over the phone. For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in my father's eyes. Not just fear of losing his empire, but fear of facing the truth about himself, about the damage he'd done, about the daughter he tried so hard to diminish. The moment felt both like an ending and a beginning. 2 decades of being the other Mitchell child had led to this moment of reckoning. The morning after being cut from the will, I sat in my modest office, staring at the email that would change everything. Healthcare Partners, one of the largest medical networks in the country, wanted to discuss implementing my AI system. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same week my parents deemed me a failure, my life's work was finally being recognized. My phone buzzed. Another message from Alexander, "Mom's crying again. Dad's furious. You really should apologize and accept their offer." Delete. The offer he referred to as my father's latest attempt at control, a position at Mitchell Investment Group, contingent on abandoning my company. My mother had presented it as an act of love. "Darling, we're trying to save you from yourself. Just like we did with Alexander when he went through his artistic phase." I remembered that phase, the only time Alexander had ever shown any spark of independence. He'd wanted to study art history in college. Our parents had quickly crushed that dream with a combination of guilt, manipulation, and financial pressure. 2 weeks of family discussions later, he was back on the approved path to Harvard Law. The door opened, and Miguel, my lead developer, burst in. "Lauren, we've got a problem. The Thompson Group just pulled out of our pilot program." My stomach dropped. Thompson had been our most promising small-scale test site. Did they say why? Some BS about strategic realignment, but here's the weird part, they just announced a partnership with TechMed Solutions. TechMed Solutions. My father's latest investment darling. The coincidence was too perfect to be coincidence at all. "There's more," Miguel continued, his face grim. 3 other potential clients canceled their meetings for next week. All within the last hour. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I used to get during childhood dinners when my father would methodically dissect my poor choices while praising Alexander's every move. But I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. "Pull up TechMed's investor list," I instructed Miguel. As he typed, my phone buzzed again. Mother this time. "Darling, your father and I are having dinner with the Harrisons tonight. Their daughter Emily just made partner at her law firm. Remember Emily? You two used to be such good friends before you became, well, before all this. She's asked about you. Perhaps if you joined us." I didn't finish reading. The investor list loaded on Miguel's screen, and there it was, Mitchell Investment Group, major stakeholder. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to my parents' house for dinner. The Harrisons were there, just as Mother had said. Emily, my former classmate, all perfectly coiffed and professionally polished, exactly as my parents wished I would be. Lauren, my mother trilled, air-kissing my cheek. "You remember Emily? She just made partner at Sterling and Ross. Isn't that wonderful?" "Congratulations," I said, watching my father's satisfied smile. This was why I'd been invited, to see the path I should have taken. Over dinner, the conversation flowed around law firm politics and country club memberships. Emily detailed her latest corporate merger while my mother nodded approvingly. Alexander arrived late, already slightly drunk, but our parents tactfully ignored his slurred speech. "Speaking of mergers," my father said, turning to me with calculated casualness, "I heard about Thompson Group. Shame about their decision. Business can be so unpredictable." The slight emphasis on how unpredictable made my blood boil. But I kept my voice steady. "Yes, fascinating how they switched to TechMed. Your new investment, isn't it, Dad?" A flicker of something, surprise? Concern? Crossed his face. "One of many. Speaking of which, David from HR mentioned you'd be perfect for our tech investment analysis division. The offer's still open." Classic Victor Mitchell strategy, crush someone's dreams, then offer them a lifeline on his terms. "Actually," I said, cutting into my untouched steak, "I have a meeting with healthcare partners next week." "But you probably already knew that, didn't you?" The dining room went quiet. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Alexander suddenly became very interested in his wine glass. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," my father replied, but his grip on his knife tightened. "No? Just like you don't know about the calls to Thompson Group? Or the other cancelled meetings?" "Lauren," my mother interjected, "this isn't the place." "When is the place, Mom?" "When Dad's finished destroying everything I've built." Emily looked like she wanted to sink into her chair. "Good." My father's voice turned to steel. "You're being dramatic. If your business can't survive normal market competition." "Normal competition?" I laughed, and the sound was harsh even to my own ears. "Is that what we're calling it?" I stood up, dropping my napkin on my untouched plate. "You know what the difference is between us, Dad? You see business as a way to control people. I see it as a way to help them." As I turned to leave, Alexander spoke up. "Always the rebel, sis. When are you going to grow up?" I stopped at the door. "I did grow up, Alex. That's what terrifies all of you. Back at my apartment, I found an email from Healthcare Partners. The subject line, meeting cancelled. I should have felt defeated. Instead, I felt a strange calm. Opening my laptop, I began to dig. If my father wanted to play dirty, I needed to understand the game. 3 hours later, I had my answer. TechMed Solutions wasn't just another investment. It was a house of cards built on manipulated data and flashy marketing. Their AI system was fundamentally flawed, producing results barely better than random chance. But they had one thing I didn't: my father's influence and money. The next morning, Miguel found me already at the office, surrounded by printouts and data analyses. "They canceled, didn't they?" he asked, setting down coffee. "They did. But look at this." I showed him what I'd found. TechMed's entire system is built on faulty algorithms. They're selling smoke and mirrors. Can we prove it? Not yet. But we will. I touched Grandmother Margaret's ring. We just need to change the game. Over the next few weeks, we worked around the clock, refining our system and documenting everything. Every test, every result, every improvement. No detail was too small. Then came the call that changed everything, not from a potential client, but from someone inside TechMed itself. "Miss Mitchell." The voice was nervous. "I'm Dr. Anderson from TechMed's development team. We need to talk. What they're doing, it's going to hurt people." As he spoke, the full picture emerged. TechMed wasn't just ineffective, they were dangerous. Their system was missing critical warning signs in patient data, but they were covering it up. That evening, my phone rang. My father. "I heard you've been asking questions about TechMed," he said without preamble. "Stop." "Or what, Dad? You'll cut me off?" "Too late for that. Lauren," his voice softened slightly, "you're my daughter. I don't want to see you hurt." Funny. That's exactly what I've been trying to prevent: people getting hurt. After hanging up, I called an emergency team meeting. As my small but dedicated team gathered, I looked at each face. They'd stuck with me through everything. "What we're about to do," I told them, "will either save our company or destroy it completely. I won't blame anyone for walking away." Miguel spoke first. "We're not going anywhere, boss." One by one, they nodded. In that moment, I understood what real loyalty looked like. Not the conditional love I'd grown up with, but something stronger. The next week, we launched our counterattack. Not with hostile takeovers or market manipulation, but with something my father never expected: the truth. The invitation arrived on heavy cream cardstock, my mother's preferred method of making anything seem official. "The Mitchell family cordially requests your presence for an important family discussion tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. I knew what this meant. My father never initiated reconciliation unless he was planning something. The timing, just days after our public exposure of TechMed's flaws, was too perfect to be coincidental. When I arrived at the mansion, Alexander's Bentley was already in the circular driveway. A united front, then. Inside, the house smelled of my mother's signature potpourri, her attempt to mask any hint of unpleasantness. "Lauren, darling." My mother's voice carried that forced cheerfulness she reserved for difficult situations. She air-kissed my cheek, her perfume overwhelming. "We're in the study." My father's study, his preferred battlefield. As I walked in, the familiar portraits of Mitchell patriarchs seemed to glare down at me with collective disappointment. Alexander stood by the window, tumbler in hand, while my father sat behind his massive desk. "Sit down, Lauren," he said, gesturing to the chair directly in front of him. The same chair where, at 17, I'd first defied his career plans for me. At 22, I'd sat there again when I announced I was leaving my corporate job to start my own company. Now, at 27, I remained standing. I prefer to stand. My father's jaw tightened. "Very well. We need to discuss your recent activities." "You mean exposing TechMed's fraudulent practices?" "Allegedly fraudulent," Alexander interjected, lawyer mode activated. "Those are serious accusations, sis. Dangerous ones." "Dangerous for whom, Alex?" The patients whose lives are at risk, or Dad's investment portfolio? That's enough. My father stood, his controlled facade cracking. Do you have any idea what you've done? The board is asking questions. Our partners are nervous. Years of work, millions in investment dash. In a system that doesn't work, I cut in. Dr. Anderson's testimony can be discredited, my father snapped. One disgruntled employee against a proven company? Please. My mother stepped forward, ever the mediator. Lauren, sweetheart, we're trying to help you. Your father has arranged everything. TechMed is willing to acquire your company, at a very generous price. You'd have a senior position, stock options. I laughed, and the sound echoed harshly in the study. You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about money. Then what is it about? Alexander demanded. Your childish need to prove yourself? To rebel against everything this family stands for. What this family stands for. I turned to face him. Tell me, Alex, how's that drinking problem coming along? The one you hide behind your perfect facade? Does Dad know about the clients you've lost because you couldn't stay sober during meetings? Alexander's face went white. My mother gasped. Lauren. How dare you? How dare I what, Mom? Tell the truth? Isn't that what you taught us? Oh wait, no, you taught us to pretend. To maintain appearances. To lie. Enough. My father slammed his hand on the desk. You want to talk about truth? Fine. The truth is, you're out of your depth. TechMed has resources you can't imagine. One word from me, and your company won't survive the week. I felt Grandmother Margaret's ring on my finger, drawing strength from it. Is that a threat, Dad? It's a reality check. Take the deal, Lauren. Don't make me destroy everything you've built. The words hung in the air, heavy with decades of conditional love and manipulated choices. I looked at my family, really looked at them. My mother, perfectly coiffed but hands trembling slightly. Alexander, darkness lurking behind his polished exterior. And my father, the puppet master who couldn't bear a single string out of place. You know what's funny? I said quietly. You're so focused on destroying what I've built, you can't see that I've already won. What are you talking about? My father's voice held a note of uncertainty I'd never heard before. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. While we've been having this lovely family chat, the FDA has been reviewing Dr. Anderson's evidence. They've just announced an official investigation into TechMed's practices. The color drained from my father's face. Alexander cursed under his breath. But that's not all, I continued. Remember healthcare partners? The deal you thought you'd killed? They've been running parallel tests of both systems for the past month. Care to guess whose technology actually works? You're bluffing, my father said, but his voice had lost its authority. Am I? Check your phone, Dad. The press release should be going out right about now. As if on cue, all their phones began buzzing. I watched as they read the news, healthcare partners announcing their exclusive partnership with my company, complete with damning comparisons to TechMed's flawed system. The board meeting tomorrow should be interesting, I said. Especially when they learn about the class action lawsuit from patients whose diagnoses were missed by TechMed's system. Did I mention Dr. Anderson kept very detailed records? My mother sank into a chair, her perfect posture finally breaking. Lauren, what have you done? What you never had the courage to do, Mom. I stood up to him. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You'll regret this. When the dust settles. The dust won't settle, Dad. TechMed's stock is already dropping. By morning, your investment will be worth half what it was. By next week, well, I'm sure Alexander can explain the legal implications of knowingly investing in fraudulent technology. Alexander set down his drink, hands shaking slightly. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I learned from the best. Isn't that right, Dad? Always be 3 steps ahead. Control the narrative. Use every weapon at your disposal. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I just decided to use those lessons differently. We're your family, my mother pleaded. No, you're my blood relatives. There's a difference. Family supports each other. Family loves unconditionally. You. I gestured around the room, you only love what you can control. My father had sunk back into his chair, looking suddenly old. Is this what you want? To destroy everything I've built? No, Dad. I want you to watch as I succeed despite everything you've done to stop me. I want you to understand that your way, the manipulation, the control, the lies, isn't the only path to success. I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Oh, and one more thing. You might want to call your lawyers. The SEC has some questions about those mysterious trading patterns around TechMed's stock. Apparently, someone tipped them off about potential insider trading. The silence that followed me out was deafening. As I walked through the house, past the family portraits and carefully curated memories, I felt lighter than I had in years. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. My phone buzzed, a message from Miguel, it's done. Everything's proceeding as planned. The team's waiting to celebrate. I looked back at the mansion one last time. Through the study window, I could see them, my father slumped in his chair, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, Alexander pouring another drink. They looked small somehow, diminished. Their power over me, the fear they'd instilled since childhood, had evaporated like morning mist. I touched Grandmother Margaret's ring and whispered, you were right. I am stronger than they knew. As I drove away, I didn't feel triumph or even satisfaction. What I felt was freedom, pure, complete, and absolutely terrifying in its possibilities. The cage door was open, and this time, I wasn't asking permission to fly. The headlines were merciless. Mitchell Investment Group faces SEC investigation. Tech scandal, healthcare giants fall from grace. Mitchell family empire crumbles amid fraud allegations. I read them on my tablet while sitting in my new office, a sleek corner suite overlooking Central Park. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the sapphire in Grandmother Margaret's ring. 1 week had passed since the confrontation in my father's study, and the Mitchell family's carefully constructed world was unraveling thread by thread. My phone buzzed, a message from Miguel, turn on channel 7. Your father's press conference is starting. The sight that greeted me on the screen was almost unrecognizable. Victor Mitchell, once the picture of corporate authority, looked haggard and old. His signature-tailored suit hung loose on his frame, his hair unkempt. Behind him, a forest of microphones waited hungrily. The allegations against Mitchell Investment Group and TechMed Solutions are. He paused, his hands trembling slightly, are being taken very seriously. We are cooperating fully with the SEC investigation. I want to assure our investors. The feed cut to a reporter. Sources indicate that the SEC is examining over $300 million in questionable transactions. The Mitchell family's personal assets have been frozen pending. I turned off the TV, a strange mix of emotions churning inside me. Then my office door opened, and Jessica, my assistant, appeared. Lauren? Your brother's wife Caroline is here. She's, well, you should see for yourself. Caroline Mitchell stood in the reception area, designer bags under her eyes instead of on her arm. Gone was the society wife polish, replaced by raw desperation. You have to help him, she burst out as soon as she saw me. Alexander, he's completely lost it. After the news broke, he started drinking heavily. Last night, he tried to. She broke down, mascara trailing down her cheeks. I led her into my office, away from curious eyes. What happened? The bank fired him yesterday. Someone leaked videos of him drunk at client meetings. He came home, drank an entire bottle of scotch, and threatened to. She couldn't finish. Where is he now? Mount Sinai. They're keeping him under observation. Your mother's there, but your father. She laughed bitterly. He's too busy trying to save what's left of his empire to care about his own son. I called Miguel to reschedule my meetings, then drove to the hospital. The private room was dim, but I could make out Alexander's form on the bed. He looked small somehow, stripped of his arrogance and bravado. Come to gloat. His voice was raspy. No. I sat in the chair beside his bed. I came to say I'm sorry about the videos. That wasn't part of my plan. He turned to look at me, eyes bloodshot. But everything else was? Destroying Dad's company? Ruining our family? The family was already ruined, Alex. We just pretended it wasn't. Silence stretched between us, filled with beeping monitors and distant hospital sounds. You know what's funny, he finally said. I always envied you. What? Your courage. To defy him. To be your own person. I never knew how. Before I could respond, our mother burst into the room. Diana Mitchell, for the first time in my memory, looked completely disheveled. Lauren? What are you? Never mind. Alexander, darling, I've spoken to the bank's board. Your father can fix this, he just needs time to dash. Stop it, Mom, I interrupted. Just stop. Look what your fixing has done to us. She turned on me, eyes flashing. How dare you? After everything you've... Mrs. Mitchell? A nurse appeared in the doorway. There's a call for you at the nurse's station. It's about your husband. My mother's face went pale. Victor? What's happened? The news spread quickly. Victor Mitchell, facing imminent arrest, had suffered a massive heart attack in his office. He was alive, but his doctors were using words like significant damage and long-term care. That evening, I sat alone in my office, watching the city lights come alive. My phone had been buzzing constantly with updates, the SEC was expanding its investigation. The Mitchell Investment Group's board had voted to remove my father. Our family's name was becoming synonymous with corporate fraud. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Jessica stood in the doorway with a small package. This just arrived from Mount Sinai Hospital. It's from your brother. Inside was a familiar object, my father's prized fountain pen, the one he'd used to sign all his major deals. A note accompanied it. He always said this would be mine someday. Turns out I don't want it. Maybe you can use it to write a better story than he did. Alex. The next few weeks passed in a blur of headlines and revelations. My father remained in the hospital, his recovery complicated by stress and depression. My mother, faced with asset freezes and social ostracism, retreated to our summer house in the Hamptons. Alexander, after completing rehab, filed for divorce and moved to Seattle, seeking a fresh start far from the Mitchell name. Meanwhile, my company flourished. The healthcare partners contract led to others, each success built on genuine innovation rather than manipulation. My team grew, but maintained its close-knit feel. We celebrated victories together, supported each other through challenges, and created something I never had growing up, a true family. One morning, about 6 months after the confrontation, I visited my father in the hospital. He sat in a wheelchair by the window, a blanket across his legs, looking out at the city he once thought he owned. The doctors say you're getting stronger, I said, breaking the silence. He didn't turn. Why are you here, Lauren? I wanted you to know, I'm establishing a healthcare technology foundation. Using my own money, not the family's. We'll fund innovations that actually help people. Now he did turn, his eyes meeting mine. And the name of this foundation? The Margaret Mitchell Foundation for Medical Innovation. Something flickered across his face, pain, recognition, perhaps even pride. She always saw something in you that I couldn't. Or wouldn't. It wasn't about seeing, Dad. It was about accepting. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. Lauren? The sapphire ring, it suits you. Walking out of the hospital, I felt the spring sun on my face. My phone buzzed, a message from my team, celebrating another successful implementation. I smiled, touching the ring that had come to mean so much more than family legacy. That evening, I stood in my office, looking out over the city. The Mitchell family as I'd known it was gone, shattered by truth and consequences. But from its ruins, something new had emerged. Not a dynasty built on control and manipulation, but a legacy of genuine value and purpose. I opened my laptop and began to type. Dear Grandmother Margaret. You once told me that some birds aren't meant to be caged. What you didn't tell me was that once those birds taste freedom, they can soar higher than anyone imagined. I wish you could see what we're building now. Not an empire of fear and control, but a community of innovation and hope. Every life we save, every patient we help, carries a piece of your wisdom forward. The sapphire ring still catches the light, reminding me daily of your courage and love. But more than that, it reminds me that true legacy isn't about what we inherit, it's about what we choose to build. You were right about everything, especially the strength you saw in me. I'm not afraid anymore. Not of failure, not of success, and certainly not of being my own person. Thank you for giving me wings. Love always. Lauren. I sent the letter to myself, a ritual I'd begun after the confrontation. Outside my window, the city sparkled with possibility. My phone buzzed with messages from my team, not employees, but family. The kind of family I'd chosen, built on trust and shared purpose rather than obligation and control. The Mitchell legacy of power and manipulation was over. But my story? It was just beginning. And this time, I was writing it my way.